introduce yourself, your role in the agency, that would be great. So we'll start that now. And I'm going to throw the agenda in the chat. Great. So it's, you know what, Jen, it's hard for not having you have control because I'm trying to admit people and run the meeting at the same time. So
Sherry, you're welcome to share co-host with either of us and we can help you. You don't need to manage it all.
All right, Beth, I just made you co-host because you were first on my list. Awesome. So we have a full agenda today, and I just wanted to start by, we talked a little bit before the meeting about just kind of tweaking how we have the discussion part of the ELD meeting. And one of the ground rules like we'd like to do going forward, particularly as we start to talk about some of our work around Act 76 and implementation and monitoring that, which we'll hear more about as the role of the ELD committee. And there'll be sessions on that pretty regularly through the next 6 or 7 months as we look at different pieces of implementation. And so what we would like to do during the discussion piece is to invite our community partners, our private partners to have opportunity to share and ask questions first, and then welcome in our state agency partners. And, after our community partners in the field and the stakeholders that have an opportunity to ask their questions, share their experiences. So we'd like to kind of try to flow and see how that goes in these meetings so that we're sure to hear from a wide range of people. It's really essential as we're looking at this investment that we really do hear from the field and understand how implementation is going, where the gaps are, and as a committee, what we should be paying attention to and identifying actions that need to be taken. So we'll thank you for that little tweak in that. We're going to start our first piece around Act 76 that we're going to hear a little bit more about today is around the readiness payments. That application began in August and distribution in September. And we're going to start with Dawn Rouse. She's going to give us an update on that from the Child Development Division perspective. And then we have a panel here today. I saw at least one of them, so we have at least one person on our panel. We had a family childcare provider, a licensed family childcare home, and a center director who are going to share sort of their experiences with the process and the difference that it's making and any suggestions or challenges. So we'll throw it over to Dawn to begin with. Thanks.
Hey, Sherry. Before I jump into the readiness payment updates, I just wanted to take a moment and introduce a couple of our new hires in the Child Development Division. We're very excited as our team starts to fill out with our Act 76 and our PDG folks. So with us today, I've invited Lisa Maines, who is our new PDG grant manager. So Lisa is coordinating the entirety of the PDG grant within all of the partner streams. So she's working with Victoria to do the greater management of the PDG grant. And I cannot tell you how excited I personally am. I'm sure Beth is too, to welcome her to the CDD. She joins us with a great deal of federal and state grant experience. And actually, Lisa, do you want to take just a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. I see some familiar names and faces out there. It's great to be here. So yeah, the last several years I've been working for Family Voices National and working with organizations and partners on a national level and grants and all of that. And prior to that, I was at Vermont Family Network doing a similar role, but more on a state level. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And our other member here is Everett Ware, and he is coming to us as the early MTSS sort of coordinator and collaborative partner with AOE around the early MTSS partner. He also is going to be taking bits and pieces of other PDG work. He's been tremendously flexible, and I'm going to let Everett introduce himself.
Sure, yeah. I'm Everett. I'm really excited to be jumping into the into CDD and into the PDG grant work and early MTSS. And I come with some background in direct experience in the field, working with infants and toddlers, as well as some teaching experience at CCV and experience in early intervention as well. So I'm bringing all that in and excited to be jumping into the systems level work.
Yeah, so we're thrilled. We're thrilled, and we hope that many of you will get to interact and contribute and collaborate with our new staff members. So onto the money. Always exciting. So we currently, to date, have about 750 providers. We've done 3 rounds of outreach to the folks who have not yet applied, who are eligible. I believe Eliza, who's our sort of coordinator for the readiness program, is going to do a crosswalk to see perhaps who hasn't applied, and perhaps we can do some personal direct outreach to those folks to see. We have some theories. Folks might be waiting until January in order to, change where their payments come in the tax year, but we're not sure. But we're very happy with the 750. We do have, we've obligated close to $17 million. So we know that that is what we have promised. So we do anticipate at least one more payment going out after the soft deadline. There may be 2. We have to see what the money situation is at the end of it. We're kind of thinking by the end of January, we'll have a much better overview of what that's going to look like. In the new year, we're going to start designing the end of program survey to be focusing on questions such as, here is what you kind of soft said at the beginning of the program that you were going to do with the money. What have you done with the money? Not in a punitive way, but just trying to figure out the difference between what you thought and what you did. We're also going to be designing some personal reach out sort of interviews to get some qualitative data about the effects, the impacts. We're going to have folks speaking to that today, but getting some of that fuller picture about the program. We did have a little glitch in November. We had 12 providers who got an overpayment that we're correcting. It was that payment was getting out right before Thanksgiving, and we suspect there was just a little bit of miskeying. So we're correcting that right now, and the providers have all been contacted and are very understanding about the overpayment. They are like, it's being fixed. And
Hey, Dawn.
Yeah.
Claire has a question, and she's wondering what % of the licensed and or regulated childcare programs that 750 represents, if you knew that.
Yeah, it's about, of the eligible programs, so there are a group of programs who are not eligible. We're calculating around 80% right now. We think that Eliza's doing a crosswalk as we speak of the list of providers who have applied, and then the list of providers who are eligible and have not yet applied. She does have some applications sitting in the queue, so she wants to get those all processed so that they can get out by the deadline of right before Christmas. That's coming. So I'll have a better percentage for you, Claire, and even by the end of the week, I think.
Now that's helpful, Dawn. I'm remembering with the CARES dollars and ARPA, I think there was a much lower rate of tapping those funds. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, one of our strategies of just doing continual checking it, like outreach to folks, has been successful. And I think that I think it's been advertised better. And, people are feeling perhaps, well, they're not dealing with a pandemic quite in the same way. So hopefully we've just done a better job of messaging and collectively getting the word out that we are here to support you. Any other question? And the application, we used a lot of the lessons learned in those CARES and ARPA structures. We looked at what folks said was good in their final surveys, and what they said this was kind of messy. So I think that with these iterations of payment supports, that we've gotten better at just knowing how to get folks through the process and getting the money that they need to support themselves. Hi, Becca.
Hi, good morning. So with my school hat on, just a thought around the messaging as you continue to reach out to programs. Because of the list that it's being sent to, it's hitting all these principals because they're the listed directors, and they're completely confused, and they're always like, oh, is this a grant we're eligible for? Is this not a grant we're eligible for? And so I don't know if in the next round of messaging, there's a way to be like, unless you get CCFAP /subsidy, right? Or something listed that way.
Yeah.
It's a
Sure.
School districts are wonky. It's all good. It's a usual, we're a little different. But I think there's an awful lot of energy being spent around trying to figure out we're not eligible for this because we only offer this, right?
Yeah.
So just a thought about messaging.
I appreciate the feedback, and this was something we actually touched on our internal readiness team meeting this week, and that's why Eliza's doing that crosswalk of who's eligible and hasn't yet versus just using the entirety of the list of.
We're always happy to get information, but it's a confusing statement.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah.
So we will have a little more time for discussion or questions, but I think what I'll do now is bring in our panel, and we're gonna have Allison Grisb and Amaria Pendlebury and Chris Nelson tell you their experiences. And I think we'll start with Allison. And Allison, feel just introduce yourself a little bit and your setting, and just tell us a little bit about your experience with the process, how the funds have impacted, just sort of from the field, how that readiness program has gone for your program, and any suggestions you have as well. And then we'll go to Amaria and then Chris.
Thanks, Sherry. My name is Allison Grisb. I am the director of the Bennington Early Childhood Center down in the southwest corner of the state in Bennington. We serve 58 children. We're licensed for 58 children per day, but we serve about 65 children, including our part-timers. And we have 18 staff. So that gives you a little idea of our program. So the perspective on this whole process is it was really exciting to hear that Act 76 passed and was going into effect. And we knew that we were going to be getting these readiness dollars, but had absolutely no idea how much it was going to be. And so for a few months, it was like, all right, like, we know we have some money coming, but we don't know how much. We don't know how to put this into our budget because we don't know how much it's going to be, but we know we're getting something. And so that was a little bit nerve-wracking, but understandable that you guys had to figure things out as well. So once the application became available, I think I probably filled it out within minutes of getting it, and it was super easy. So that aspect of it was really, really great. And so maybe a few days or a week before the application became available, there was this estimate formula that came out so we could kind of figure out how much we were going to get. And so that was nice and helpful as well. And we ended up getting a little bit more than I had anticipated, which was even better. And so what we first decided to do with this money that we were going to be getting is pre-COVID, we give our staff 5 paid sick days, 6/personal days, however they want to use them, per year, in addition to their vacation time and holiday time. But those are their sick days. And during COVID time, we ended up giving them some more, but that was temporary. I think we used some of the other funds that we got during those times to do that. And so this year we were back to the just having 5 sick days. And that was making some people a little nervous, knowing that COVID is still out there, the flu is still out there, the stomach bug is still out there. We still have lots of illness, RSV, all these other things that people are getting. And so the very first thing we talked about doing with this money was to give our staff more sick days. So we were anticipating getting a little over $30,000. And so we allocated 4 more sick days per staff person for the school year. And everybody was really excited about that. And then we ended up getting a little more money than we had estimated. And we're doing a couple of different things with that. We did give our staff raises, which was also much appreciated. We were feeling very not good about the fact that some of our newer, lower on the hierarchy staff were making less than they could make at the new Burger King that just opened up down the road. So we made sure to bump that up a little bit. And then we also are giving out some sporadic bonuses throughout the year to show appreciation for staff who are going above and beyond. So folks who are hardly ever absent, or who come and help out on the weekend with a family event, or who are just going above and beyond their expected duties in ways that help the program. Showing really positive attitude, those things. It's a little hard to figure out, but we've given out a few of these bonuses so far, and they're definitely appreciated. And then we do have an unexpected facility expense. One of our air conditioning units has stopped working. And so we're going to use some of the funds to replace that as well. So we're very, very, very appreciative of the funds. The process was super easy. And I'm excited to hear that there might be a couple extra months worth of payments. And I'm sure I'm going to think of more things. Oh, one other thing is this is going away from the readiness payments a little bit, but part of the reason of the readiness payments was to get us to this point where subsidy increases, right? Which is happening next week. We don't have a ton of kids who receive subsidy here, so we're not going to get a huge influx from that money. So that whole future is a little scary and unknown to us, but we've started working with First Children's Finance to do kind of a review of our finances and like figure out what that's going to look like in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years going forward. So that's exciting for us. And hopefully we'll figure out lots of positives from that financial review that we're doing with Jen. Okay, I'll pass it on to the next person now, but if I think of something else, I'll raise my hand to come back in.
Thank you, Allison.
You're
I
welcome.
think we were going to move to Amaria. Are you, I know it's a hard time, as we all know, for childcare folks to join us at this time. Hi, Amaria.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you'll hear kids in the background. So, and I might have to be like, excuse me, hold on a second. So my name is Amaria Pendlebury. I have a licensed home childcare program down in Brattleboro. I am also the chair for Wyndham Early Childhood Educators Co-op, so our network group. So I would agree that this readiness grant was super easy. I feel like every time I fill out a grant, it's been getting easier and easier to fill out and takes like a lot less time, which is so nice. It's as a home childcare provider, I have 12 children full-time and 1 staff. So that means that I am director/teacher, which means that I don't have much time. So it's really nice to have a grant that's so easy and it's so rewarded. I think, you know, sometimes you put in all this work to fill out paperwork and then it's like, you don't really get much. So it's like this balancing act of like, do I really have the time versus like how much like time am I going to spend? So this was like absolutely wonderful. Like it was so easy to do. I could do it within minutes. The money coming back, I had no idea. So I actually didn't even do the calculator. That's how insane my life has been. I was like, I don't have time to figure out anything. And so when it hit my bank account, I was like, what? And like, this is like absolutely amazing. So it was like so surprising. Like my staff and I were like overjoyed. She had needed to take some trips and some time off. I was stressed out about like paying a sub. I wanted to give her some personal time, you know, she and I've been trying to work on that a little bit better, just since it's just her and I, and it's hard budgeting. I keep my costs really low because in Brattleboro we have a very low income population, so I try to keep prices as low as possible to try to get low income families into high quality programs. That's my philosophy. So my budget and overhead is very slim, so I don't usually take much time myself. But with this grant, I was able to start paying her like vacation time and like give her sick time and also be able to pay a sub a worthwhile amount that they would actually want to come deal with all these kids, crazy kids. I have found I was able to hire a sub so I could do meetings without children running around or being like, I'm also being a teacher right now. So I just feel like for me, it's definitely helped me be able to focus on my business aspect a lot more, my own professional development. The kids know I'm on the phone, so they're going to be extra loud today. But it's just been like really helpful. I'm also able while waiting for subsidy to come down, I know next week is the date, but in the last few months, I've been able to reach out to some families that were really struggling, but really needing childcare, that they might live in New Hampshire, the subsidy program doesn't qualify them as much, or it's just like a more complicated system. Hold on a second. Sorry, they were starting to wander. They were like, oh, let's go find Maria. So just being able to have that little bit of flexibility without worrying about the cost for my teacher or myself has been really, really helpful, and be able to support the families. I know that the goal is to help as many families as possible. I really like that I don't have to change my rates for this next subsidy group. And that's been like a big thing, is like I can give out scholarships to families right now. I have been the ones that really didn't have the income possible to help pay for the amount. So I've been able to be like, it's okay, you can pay me whatever you can, and then still feel like I can meet my costs that I need to make. So it's been really nice for my staff, for myself, that I can like be like, hey, I don't have to work 60-hour weeks. I can actually work like 55 and have 5 hours like where I'm actually human and like get my life together. So it's just been like such a great thing. And I'm excited for the subsidy piece to kind of be coming in to help cover some of those costs that will go away when this grant is done, so it can continue on. So I really feel very positive that as a business, and a very small business, that this is very possible to be like, I can continue following through this philosophy without feeling like the end days are coming near where I'm going to have to kind of pinch pennies again and give up my glorious subs. But I think that's all I can say. Oh, and I have heard, I did tell as a network director, chair, I did hear a lot of really positive feedback from my network group as well. Just the same things, especially home childcare programs, saying that they feel like they have a little bit more flexibility, or they don't have to work so many long hours, or they can now hire a sub for things. Just the same things. I think a lot of the places around here try to stay as low as possible, especially the home childcare programs. So it's very validating to know that you're getting some compensation to help you feel like you're not struggling to make the ends meet to service or provide a service to these families that you care a lot for in your community.
Thank you, Amaria. We will go to Chris Nelson, and then we'll open up some discussion. And I know there are other childcare programs that are part of our committee and attendees, and would certainly welcome them to share any other additional information after we hear from Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Nelson up in Troy. I have a registered family home. The application was easy. I care for 10 children every day. I can serve up to 14 that share spots. Teachers share spots with school-age children who don't need care during the school year. So I try to make a difference in as many as I can. The application was completely easy. I filled it out as soon as it arrived. It went right through. That was great. When I looked at how I was going to spend it, and I'm following that plan, I looked at the three points of the program: the infrastructure, the staffing, and the children, and wanted to touch on all of them. So for infrastructure, I purchased a generator so that it can stay open when the power goes down, which in the kingdom's important. For staff, I was able to give them a bonus. I was able to give them more days off. And I put 5% towards their savings plan if they want to save some from their check. And then for the children, I actually went to them and asked them what they would add if they were making a program. And so they've decided a few things that we're going to try in our curriculum. And with the increases in Act 76, all of this will be sustainable after it's in. So this is kind of like our test period for how wonderful it's going to be once it's finally passed through and we get to live it. 100% of my kids are on subsidy. So it'll be a huge change for our program.
Thanks, Chris. So we open it up for discussion or additional questions, or I know Lori and Claire and Sonia, all of you may have had experiences. It's interesting to hear the difference it makes. And I saw Claire's the generator is amazing. You know, having worked with Chris for a while, absolutely power outages in the kingdom. And now it doesn't disrupt care. Awesome. And if you have any questions for Chris, Amaria, Allison as well.
I would just echo, application was about as easy as any I've ever filled out for a grant. So thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, we are using the lion's share right now. We gave a 6% increase to all of our staff. That's been a huge thing. And our intention is to continue, that'll just continue and be rolled. It's in a form of a bonus at this point. It'll be rolled into their salary moving forward with the 35% increase. But additionally, we've spent some funds on, we have several children with one-to-one aids here, as well as some high needs, and we've needed equipment and things for them forever. That providers have asked if we can purchase, and we've never had a way of purchasing some of this stuff because it's kind of very pricey. And so we actually earmarked a chunk of funding for that with the readiness funds. And we've just been setting up our scholarship structure and moving forward to see how to implement that starting in January with the CCFAP. So now that we've gotten the equipment that we need and those kids, we hope to shift that funding into that big chunk of funding into something else, mostly scholarships.
Thanks, Sonia.
And I think I would just piggyback a lot of similarities, a lot of appreciation. I think a number of us have been in the field for a long time, and I saw the rates. I mean, I saw the percentage, the 35%, but when you see the rates come out from Emily Hazard, they're pretty significant. We have a large group of children here that are on CCFAP, and so that would make a really big difference to our bottom line. One thing that we've done that we're excited about is bringing reflective supervision and a reflective practice to our program. We've subcontracted with someone. She's had one training with staff already, about a 2-hour training, really laying the groundwork about reflective practice, and also working with our program director so she can also get reflective supervision. A lot of it ties to burnout prevention and lived vicarious trauma teachers are carrying with them. And the stories that they're taking home, and just how to process and feel refreshed, or a little bit like you can come back to work with less of a heavy load. And I think similar around salaries, we were able to increase 20%, which was major for us. We're in parent-child center, and so our salaries in the childcare program, unfortunately, were less than some of our other positions, bachelor level positions in our agency, because we had some staff in our program that were under bachelor level in their childcare. But we increased salaries across the board, and that's made a significant difference. We've done retention bonuses like others. I love I think Christina was talking about asking children. That's great. We haven't done that for feedback, but wellness and self-care was a big thing, and staff liked that. Our director threw out to staff like chair massages, like a great escape or a bowling outing, or just some sort of self-care and what adds play to what can add play to your day, kind of a thing. And so again, just trying to do self-care. So those are some ideas, and we're appreciative.
It is like so amazing, all the great uses of the funds and how programs were able to identify like really what they need. And like this has been the best 37 minutes of my week so far. So it's just amazing to hear from all of you. I know you're all amazing, but I don't get a lot of chance to hear, and just so thoughtful in how you're using all of these funds and what a difference that it's making. Does anyone else want to have a question? I invite anyone that would like a question or to share any other thoughts or reflections or uses of the funds for your own program.
Hi, I'm Holly from Champlain Valley Head Start. I just wanted to agree, like it was such a good opportunity to listen how people used the funds, and I appreciate all of the creativity and the intention behind it. And I think it's really important to be having providing opportunities just for small amounts of time for us to all hear what's happening out there. And I commend you all for your creativity with this.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone, our panel especially, for agreeing to make time in their day. And for those of you that want to stay for more, you're always welcome to come anytime, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of today. And for those of you that regularly attend, thank you for sharing your perspective. Like I think a lot of you said, I've been doing this a long time or forever, and I can confirm because I've been doing it with you a long time and forever, and just your energy and your thoughtfulness and just all that you've been able to achieve through a pandemic, through different grant programs, and to continue in a positive way to impact the kids and families in your community is incredibly amazing. So it was great to hear from all of you, for sure. And the next part of our agenda, I think it's Janet. I think. Yes, Janet McLaughlin is here with us today. I don't know if you're getting an introduction from Dawn or you're just going to take it from here, but welcome and thanks for joining and thanks for coming to tell us what's going on.
We are here to get your thoughts. So,
yes.
And Emily Hazard is with me too, especially for this conversation. So it's so nice to be with you all. And to be back with this group for folks that, again, I've been doing this work with for a while, not forever, right? I don't fall in the forever category, but for the last 8 years, starting about 8 years ago, I'd been a part of ELD and served as the co-chair for a few years. And so it's nice to be back in this space. And for today, we wanted to get your feedback on a specific element related to childcare financial assistance. So within Act 76, hopefully you guys are seeing the changes. They are rolling out. We do have another webinar on sort of a question and answer session scheduled on Monday. Right now, it sounds like, I think the update we got yesterday, there's like 190 people signed up for it, but room for more, trying to make sure we can just answer questions, make sure that there's combat any misinformation. I do feel like we hear people who are like, it's just, and it makes sense, like just a real, like, everybody's coming from this sense of like, years of being underfunded, sort of a scarcity mindset. So there's like some skepticism, like, is this really coming? And is this money? So we are wanting to have that conversation or trying to answer some of those questions on Monday. So I can put a link to the registration in there in case you haven't seen that. But one of the key changes within Act 76 that the division was asked to consider was around childcare financial assistance and the way that childcare financial assistance pays for children, and how is it enrollment and attendance. And so we have Emily Hazard and our childcare financial assistance program administrator our plan is for us to share a little bit about like how we what we were asked to do by the legislature, what currently, how we currently reimburse programs on behalf of families enrolled in childcare financial assistance. And then some of the, our proposal for how we might make changes to going forward. And so we wanted to get your feedback on that proposal because we're going to, communicate that back we need to communicate that back to the legislature and then, get it into the process of what would be needed for policy change and rulemaking and information technology, like the IT system side of it. So that's what our plan is. So at this point, I'm happy to turn it over to Emily, who can, who's gonna share, share her screen and walk you through a PowerPoint.
Thanks, Janet. Never shared in Zoom before, but it looks exactly the same as Team. Bear with me, I have this bar that is not moving, so I can click the button I want to click. Should be sharing a presentation. Janet, do you mind just giving me a thumbs up if you see it? Okay, thank you. All right, so we put together this presentation on where we're at with the CCFAP enrollment-based payments. So here's the language as it is in Act 76. So Act 76 requires payments shall be based on enrollment. The department, in consultation with the Office of Racial Equity and stakeholders, shall adopt rules pursuant to 3 VSA Chapter 25 that define enrollment and the total number of allowable absences to continue participating in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. The department shall minimize itemization of absence categories. So for the stakeholders, that's part of the reason why we're bringing this proposal to you today. And the other group of stakeholders who an even earlier version of this proposal has been shared with are the CCFAP eligibility specialists. We held a listening session with them last week and shared an even earlier version of this draft. So we're at the point of getting stakeholder engagement. What are enrollment-based payments? I put a couple resources here that we have been using around defining enrollment. So paying based on enrollment delinks payment from the child's occasional absence, recognizes that cost of care does not change due to a child's occasional absence, reflects the practice of parents who pay for care privately, and does not require lead agencies to pay for all days when children are absent. So in Vermont, the lead agency is the Child Development Division, lead agency for CCDF funding. So the current state of CCFAP payments, for the purposes of CCFAP payment, enrollment is currently defined as a child has an active CCFAP certificate connected to a specific child care program. And we currently pay on enrollment when a child has an active CCFAP certificate tied to a specific child care program. The program submits its biweekly CCFAP attendance with hours of attendance or applicable quota days for the child, and the provider's attendance does not exceed allowable coded days. And I think the distinction that we are looking to make, or the kind of where we're in a unique position with enrollment versus attendance, is that our current model is already very close to an enrollment-based system because we do pay for occasional absences. So the current state around absences, regulated childcare providers can enter letter codes into their childcare attendance. Sure, if you're a provider, you're very familiar with all of our codes that we have and entering them into CDDIS in place of hours when a child is absent or when the program is closed on normal days of operation. So we currently use 5 codes. For program closures and child absences, we have the provider close day, that's 30 days per provider per fiscal year. Sick child is essentially unlimited for illness or medical appointments. There are some circumstances where a sick code, where a hold placement may be more appropriate for a child who has an extended illness. But as it is right now, there's no cap to the number of sick days that a provider can use codes for. Vacation is for children per child, 20 days per child per fiscal year, and the family must communicate with the provider that they wish to use that vacation day. The hold placement, those are exceptional circumstances for extended temporary absence. And temporary is defined as typically no longer than 2 service periods. But sometimes there are even exceptions to that we consider. And then the no notice, CCFAP will make payment for 1 week if the child stops attending without advance notice. So for current state, when payment ends, CDD stops making CCFAP payments for a child to a specific childcare program when that child no longer has an active CCFAP certificate connected to the specific childcare program. This happens in a variety of circumstances. So a family is no longer eligible for CCFAP. They've moved out of state, they exceed the income guidelines, a parent doesn't have an approved service need, although assistance may temporarily continue in some situations. Their annual application and supporting documentation is not submitted, or a child is no longer age eligible. So if the child's over 13, doesn't have special health needs, that's typically when CCFAP payment ends. Another circumstance when payment can end is that a child's no longer attending a childcare program. Variety of reasons for that as well. So a child could be transitioning to a program or a school that does not charge tuition, such as a public school, some Head Start programs. The child transitions to a program or school that doesn't accept CCFAP or is not licensed by CDD. They're not able to accept CCFAP payments. Or a child moves to another childcare program. So a certificate with one provider could end because it will be beginning with a new provider, and that CCFAP payment follows the child. So for the enrollment-based payments, our areas of focus, we're looking at defining enrollment and potentially what disenrollment in CCFAP looks like. Define the total number of allowable absences to continue participating in CCFAP. Language right out of Act 76. Minimize itemization of absence categories, also right out of Act 76. It was important for us to maintain provider closure limits separate from child absences, and that provider closure allowance shouldn't unduly impact families. Then making child absence policy more flexible is another area of focus, and recognizing that our current state doesn't really allow for a great way to capture issues that may impact attendance, such as family emergencies, transportation, parent illness. We have a good way of capturing family vacations, but the policy could be more inclusive. So the proposed changes with where we're at for the enrollment-based payments, we're proposing to create a single code for allowable absences for children. Expand the number of allowable child absence days from 20 to 30 per child per state fiscal year. And I think this is one of the areas where feedback would be really helpful around what is a reasonable number of days per child absent. Expand the reasons for allowable child absences. Really any reason why a child is absent could be captured under this child absence code. Could include, and that would include sick days, extended temporary absences, and unexplained absences as well. And exceptions can be made to increase the number of allowable child absence days in extenuating circumstances. So if there's a reason why a child is absent more than the limit that we define, if there are circumstances where they need to be absent longer, we can review those to see if CCFAP can continue making payments as an exception. And then the other part of the proposed change is increasing the number of days for no notice from a maximum of 1 week to a maximum of 2 weeks. And this is to help better align with provider policies, typically requiring a 2-week notice if the family is going to leave. So the benefits of this proposal, it allows for more flexibility with child absences, allows families more privacy with the reasons a child is not attending. Currently, the provider would need to know if the child is sick or if the family is using a vacation day, but with this proposed model, the family just communicating to the provider that the child won't be attending will give the provider the information that they need to submit their attendance for CCFAP. It's feasible within our current IT system. One of the possibilities that we're exploring is changing what is currently the V code for vacation to C for child absence. As I've learned with CDDIS, it seems incredibly simple, but the programming to do that may be a little more complex. But other than that, we do have functionality in CDDIS to have limits on coded days, and we do have the ability to increase coded days both for children, for all children, and then individual circumstances as needed. So that functionality is currently in place. Another benefit is that we would be meeting the requirements of Act 76. So defining the total number of allowable absences to continue participating and minimize itemization of absence categories. So attendance reports is a big question that we've been receiving around what does attendance mean for enrollment-based payments. So at this point, we do plan to continue collecting attendance reports to issue CCFAP payment. This information is taken from one of the resources I shared at the beginning of the presentation, that lead agencies have legitimate reasons for requesting that providers continue to track child absences and to provide that information for the purposes of issuing payments. So welfare of children, accountability, it's a really important part currently of our program integrity, and which is a requirement for CCDF funding. Auditing and just having that data is an important part of our program administration, and licensing, just ensuring that providers are adhering to ratio and group sizes. And then it's also important to note that variable certificates that pay that daily rate, variable certificates are always going to pay a daily rate. That's how they're designed to make payments. So in order to pay on a variable certificate, we would need that daily attendance to be able to pay. So that's where we're at with our proposal, and some of our next steps were in the phase of engagement with stakeholders, working with Office of Racial Equity and just getting feedback around just this proposed model. And then these changes are going to have to go through rulemaking. So I know our initial, we were initially tasked with having this ready for January, which is not going to happen. So we're trying to settle on what model we'll be using going forward, and issuing a policy memo in the interim before it gets adopted into rulemaking. The rulemaking will include a public comment period also, so we'll be able to get even more feedback from providers in the community. And then another just next step is explore that feasibility of changing the code name in the system to C for child absence. So those are some of our next steps, and I think that concludes what I had planned to share.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Emily. So yeah, so I'm curious about questions, I guess maybe clarifying questions first, or I mean, we also really are interested in people's feedback. If you feel like we're heading in the right direction, if you feel like, you know, how you feel like this might work for your families and work for you as program leaders. Chris Nelson.
Hi, I just I think the enrollment versus attendance is great. I'm wondering if you guys have been able to or have started exploring like all the little quirks to attendance and supporting families. For example, will the new model support and honor custody orders where one parent might get the child 5 weeks out of the year at their discretion, and the mom doesn't want to use her vacation time because she has vacation time, but it has to go the child has to go to the dad's, would be an example of that type of thing. Right now we take no pay for that, because if she doesn't want a vacation and that child's out and it's not sick, it's just written as their court order. We just can't take payment for it the way it is. The second one was due to the scarcity of childcare. Sometimes if I take a day off, I have another provider who accepts CCFAP. So one of my families can take one spot there if she has it available, and we have to call and have that child put on it. If it's in enrollment versus attendance, will that be able to change for just a day or 2 days, or will there be notice, or is it capacity? I'm not sure how that will work. Sorry, I just have all these weird things.
Yeah, no, well, no, it's perfect, Chris. I mean, I think this is the part where, right, is just, these are great examples of showing how this is like more complicated than it seems, right? In terms of figuring out all these details and then figuring out how to write up the policies and then figuring out how to code the IT system, right? And so in terms of like, why does this take a little longer than maybe, you know, the initial guideline that was laid out for us? But I think Emily probably has some answers to you to those to your examples.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks for the great questions, Chris. Yeah, so I think the first example that you gave around custody, I think that's where increasing the number of days and the allowable reasons for absences, where that could be a more supportive and flexible avenue for those families to be able to maintain payment to you. And then in terms of, if you're closed and the family is using a backup provider, we don't plan to make any changes to current practice around that. So what usually happens is that the ongoing provider, they have a set certificate, and then the backup provider gets that variable certificate, and they receive payment only for the day that the child is attending. So enrollment would be paid to the ongoing provider, and then families would still have the option of using a backup provider as needed, and the backup provider would be paid the daily rate.
Great. I think it was Meg who Baker was next, I think.
Yeah, I think that moving to an enrollment-based system is fabulous. I think it'll give a lot more stability, especially for some of our families who maybe have more risk factors, and attendance is a challenge. I know as a district, one of the ways that we've looked at absences with pre-K kiddos, because we deal with this a lot, is there's sort of two different kinds of absences that I see. One is extended absences, which tend to be families out of the country or families on vacation, right? The other thing we see a lot is repeated absences. And that's often families who might have difficulty with transportation or some ongoing health stuff, that kind of thing. So in my mind, that's sort of the way I have framed it. And when I'm thinking about a child who has been absent a lot, because there is some research out there, and I can drop it in the chat, but there's research about learning outcomes that's connected to absenteeism. And so I look at it thinking about a percentage, because a child who's enrolled 2 or 3 days a week, if they've been absent 10 times, that's really different than a child who's enrolled 5 days a week, but has been absent for 10 times, right? And so that's another way sort of framing the conversation and thinking about it with families as well.
That's thanks, Meg. I think that's really helpful for us to think about. I mean, I think we have definitely been in some of our conversations thinking about like what our capacity, like what it's like technologically a little bit, what is the in terms of like, are you setting a limit of days? Are you looking at repeated like, are you looking at number of days absence in a row or repeated absence? But this, I will say that this sort of like pattern, like the question of the pattern is something that it's sort of why we want like to have a limit. And then like, because if a child's not using, you know, is already absent 6 total weeks, you know, like within a year, or, you know, 9 weeks in a year, like like, we can give them more days, but like, let's find out and make sure that that family doesn't need some extra support, or maybe they actually needed a part-time certificate, or maybe they didn't actually need or maybe they did a variable certificate. Like, what is the need that that family had if they're not, attending, in the way that was anticipated when their CCFAP certificate was created. Okay, Linda.
Yeah, hi, thank you. This is exciting. And especially around when I think about transportation, this is super helpful for families who have trouble with transportation. We have a family right now that I'm like, I'm not really sure what to do with you because it's been several weeks. And so that is very exciting to hear. The other piece, I kind of lost my train of thought. I would be cautious to advertise to families that they don't have to tell providers why they're out. I think that's important information for us to know, so that if they need those extra supports, we can provide those extra supports and connect them to the right, resources. The other piece, the 2 weeks of no notice, I think is awesome. We were in a situation this fall where we didn't realize, like, we found out a week into the child being gone that it was a no notice situation. And so having 2 weeks of no notice, I think, would be super helpful for providers. And I think that's it. The rest, it's super exciting. And hopefully, my one question is, in the Act 76, what is the deadline for this to happen?
Yeah. So in Act 76, it was saying, it said January, that we needed to define enrollment by January 1st.
Okay.
And that the payments shall be on enrollment. It says, and so,
but it has to go through the rules process.
The wording of the memo, but essentially, right, like, we're defining enrollment, right, as a child with an active CCFAP certificate that's tied to a specific childcare program. And then right now, with the number of days absence that we have, and the flexibility that we do already have through eligibility specialists with the hold codes and the and some of the exceptions we can make associated with family support childcare, like, in most cases it is functionally like enrollment-based payment. But so we're going to have that defined by enrollment, but that's minimizing the absence categories. That would be in our heads right now, and I don't want to I'm telling you, but it's not in stone yet, is we're thinking that that hopefully with the July 1st, with changes that we made in July 1st of 2024 would be when we would actually be able to implement. But again, we have to get it worked into the IT schedule.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Claire?
Yeah, I think, ditto, I think what folks have said, and it is exciting, enrollment based. I mean, the very first slide that Emily, you were showing is acknowledging, I think, greater parity in my mind towards like a public ed system. If a child's there or not, our expenses remain flat, and they don't go up and down based on attendance. Something I've really advocated for and testified for years on this. So I'm thrilled. I expect the process to kind of probably have bumps, I'm sure, as you're enrolling it, but definitely what people have said in terms of the family's absence. The other thing that pops up for us when is DCF involvement. We will absolutely lose a child in a family, and I don't mean really lose them, but like lose sight of them and not know where they are, and work pretty hard. We're strengthening families childcare grant as well. So we all do it. It's part of what we do, is try and find the family and the child and make that connection, but just making sure. And I heard you guys mention family support, but just and I know it was I saw it somewhere, just the connection with family services and the children that are in protective services, and making sure that there's alignment with how that works and flows with getting the PSAs from the social workers, and ultimately what we're doing, right, is we're holding space for a child to come back to reenter, and it's safe and it's consistent and it's a healthy environment, and it's a support for a foster family as well if they're not in conditional custody, you know, still with a family member. So just like those points. And then I think the other thing that was jumping out was and I love the simplicity around billing and not multiple codes. When you have like the slide, Emily had like current status, and you talked about the number of vacation days, sick days, and provider closed days, that like jumped out at me. Provider closed days, and I understand it's super important to remain open. It's a stable foundation for families, whether they're working or whatever they're doing, to make sure their family is financially, you know, stable and successful. But providers also need to have closed days. We need to have earned service days. We need to have vacation days for staff for like wellness. And it's something else that I've really fought for or advocated for around parity with public schools. So I just don't know where you're leaning towards in terms of quantifying like the number of like provider closed days. You had that one slide that said provider days 30, that jumped out at me. Because that's, you know, and we have like the holidays, the paid holidays, like, so there's the recognized CCFAP provider closed days. Oh, and also we've lost power 3 Mondays in a row. So we've like already are like, oh my God, we burned through 3 of our provider closed days for nothing to do with like circumstances outside of our own control. So just putting that out there and wondering what the response is, looking at that. I don't mean to shortchange families. Programs need to be open for families, but we also have very legitimate reasons for needing to be scheduled to be closed or weather related, and not being and being held harmless on that end is something I would advocate for. Thank you.
Yeah, Emily.
I can jump in. Great feedback, Claire. So I took a couple notes as you're sharing your feedback. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got from the CIS childcare coordinators when we shared this proposal last Thursday was around how helpful that elimination of the hold for the extended temporary absence, how helpful that would be in situations of when a child is in foster care or transitioning between programs, because it is a lot of work for the provider, the social worker, the CIS childcare coordinator in gathering this documentation to have a hold approved. So that was one of the pieces of feedback, is that this model would actually be more supportive to those transitional circumstances. And then, as I said, we could also have the potential to increase the number of days if there is an exception to the number of days the child is absent due to the transition is taking longer. So Janet, did you want to add something?
Go ahead.
Okay. 30 days. The 30 provider closed days at this point, we're not proposing to increase that limit. Part of the enrollment-based the research that we've done is around provider closed days shouldn't unduly impact families. One of the potential possible changes around that, though, is that we do have the possibility to increase the number of days that we pay a provider on an exceptional basis. So if something catastrophic happens, I think that's something that we can also consider if they're going to exceed those 30 closed days, if there's something that happened and that it makes sense to maintain payment. So I think that's another change that we can put into this proposed model.
And I think that I heard that like we did like this summer, like we did do that some for programs that were impacted by flooding, right? That they got some extra, you know, that they got some provider closed days. And so I think the key though is for us to figure out, right, like what's the difference between just like snow days that kind of people are planning, you know, like, and does there need to be an exception every time there's a snow day versus like, you know, how do we figure out what is truly exceptional, knowing that it is really hard to plan around the weather. But so thank you. Okay, Lori.
First, just like everybody else, just incredibly grateful for the change in the system and moving to an enrollment-based system instead of an attendance-based system is, I think, going to be really helpful for providers. Just a couple of thoughts that I had that sort of builds on what people have already talked about. First, I'm really grateful for the 30 days that we will get.
I do think this directly links, right, to supporting early childhood educators, right? Because if I'm closed, I have to have the income to be able to pay my educators. And whether it's a snow day or it's a scheduled holiday or it's some unusual circumstance, our families have to pay, because I can't promise to pay my educators if families aren't paying us, right? And so for families on CCFAP, that means they still, that when we don't get paid for that. So even if it is just a snow day, that's still a loss of income. And when you're talking about especially bigger programs, I have 35 teachers and staff. Like, it's a number to pay on a daily basis for salary. That's 82% of our budget is just staff, right? So just something to think about, but also grateful for the 30, because without that, like, we'd be even further, like significantly further in the hole, because we would have a loss of income, but still have to pay our educators, and we're not going to not pay them because they also are dependent on that income. The other thing I did want to mention, really excited about the potential increase for the 2 weeks for no notice, but I have to be honest in saying it takes me more than 2 weeks to fill a spot. So all of a sudden a child stops coming, right? We're doing the things on our end, supporting the family, finding out where they are they coming back, what's happened? That can take a few days, right? So by the time we even realize this is a no notice situation, I then have to end them, right? Enroll somebody from our waiting list. That's a transition visit. That's a however long to get their CCFAP in place. Like, it is reasonably like longer than 2 weeks. I know that some programs might only have a 2-week notice for paying families, but that doesn't mean we can fill a spot in 2 weeks. So there will still be a loss of income unless somebody has some really brilliant ideas for filling spots really quickly, but that doesn't feel like super best practice as far as like supporting the whole family and transitioning a new child in. So I don't know, I would encourage even like a 30-day notice period, which I know may not be possible, but like that's sort of the reality, at least that I'm living. I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Lori.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone. I have 2 things. I really do like the code, the single code for families. I think that private pay families, that's sort of how they live their life in childcare. They don't have to provide a particular code for a particular absence. So I do like that change a lot. And I just want to reiterate that I don't think 30 days is a lot. And I don't know if there's another category that is, in 10 weather days or whatever, but there's 12 recognized Vermont holidays right from the beginning. And Claire has already had 3 power outages. So she's already she's getting close to using up half her time, and she hasn't even built in vacation or PD days or, so anyway, that's what strikes me, but looks like really good changes that are anticipated.
Okay. I wanted to ask specifically around, and just want to make sure people understand what we're saying in terms of the one. So Sherry, I just want to acknowledge, yes, I hear you on the provider's side of it. And I guess I feel like, yes, that's almost like a big separate conversation about how to do that. I mean, and I know in some other states too, they give out, they're saying these are our paid days, right? And they actually list what their holidays are of we're going to pay you for these days. And then you have a separate flat, and those are just, and everybody closes those days essentially, right? And then you've got another set that are your flexible days. So there's options. Again, I'm not how this works in CDDIS, you know what I mean? There's ways for us to potentially think about this. I guess but I think people do know, right? That was increased, I think in July of 2022. And so I guess recognize we are not to perfection yet, but there's a bigger conversation to have there in terms of also. But I would say, I just want to make sure in terms of this idea of the child absences, right? The single code is, we also heard the feedback again, and Emily explained this, I guess, especially from the eligibility specialist, right? Where it's well, the parent might be there's just a whole reason, right? And that people are sometimes using the vacation codes or the sick codes right now, and it's just we don't necessarily need to distinguish those because, and they, and also especially for families that are on childcare financial assistance, sort of, it's vacation. It's there's people that don't go on vacation ever, right? And so it's like asking them to use the V code feels a little funky. But so you've got the child absences. So then we need a place at which, there's a prompt in our system to say, is this child really, like, are they enrolled in CCFAP properly? And the reason we want to do that is because, one is because we want to be good stewards of all these public resources that we have. And we're now, especially with the rates going up, right? It's a lot of resources so we want to make sure that we've got people placed in the right program and at the right certificate levels. The other reason, right, is we know that there's not enough childcare capacity in the state. And so, right, if we're holding space, if there's a lot of spaces that are open for children who aren't attending, what does that mean for the kids that don't have a spot being held for them, right? And are piecing it together, right? So we want to have we don't want it just to be like totally open. So then there's that question of right now it's the 20 vacation days and it's been unlimited sick. And so we're saying, what's that limit of 30? And these are program days, like not, so is it 30 days? Is it 45 before, like, there's a prompt to us of like, is this child in enrolled in childcare financial assistance in the right way? Knowing that, again, we can add more days for children that have an exceptional circumstance, or it doesn't even have to be that exceptional. We just confirm that they're still in the right thing, right? Like this is still their needs. And maybe they needed some support for attendance, and then get more days. So, Chris?
Will there be a way of, so I have a few kids, 2 kids in here right now who are only scheduled to come 3 or 4 days a week. That's all their parent needs. That's all, whatever. So I fill up the spots creatively, Is there a way of, so those aren't absences. They were never intended to be there. Will that count as an absence, or is that still okay? Because you're going to get 52 on one kid. They're going to be out 52 times. I already know that. And that's if they're not sick, because they're just not scheduled to be there.
That's helpful to hear. Emily, do you have a response to that right now? Or okay.
Yep. Yeah, I think that would be the same as how it currently is handled. So attendance or codes are only entered for the days that the child is scheduled to be there.
Okay.
So it doesn't, so I think what Janet was asking is there an idea of like, what is the number of absences a child may have before you start to determine that they're not utilizing CCFAP in a way it's intended, right? Is that
basically?
I know
yes.
it's tricky because I think about it too. I think about it like there's this consecutive absences is one, like if, and then there's the 2 or 3 days like every week, but they do come some. So it's a tricky question to answer. So I don't have an answer. I was just restating your question and telling you.
But yes, that is so. Yes, thank you for knowing, at least articulating it. The question was clear, at least to one person. But that's the trick of what that number should be, because that is one of the things we're tasked with doing. But it also is the sort of like the key from the sort of in the IT systems side of it. But we can work on it together. I mean, we know that right now it's going to be more than 20. The question is it 30? Is it 35? I don't know. Yeah.
It's a tough one. So I think we're going to move on to the BBF team, but I think that's a question that Janet just asked that Emily and Janet or Dawn would take some feedback as you think about maybe your individual situations and some suggestions around that.
And I do just want to reiterate I think the confusing point and the point that family hardship will come into play with this is the custody. 3 days one week, 4 days the next week, 2 days one week, 2 weeks with dad, week on, week off. Judges are really creative on not being consistent on what child custody orders and visitation are.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And then I also do see the comments on the side again, where I agree that talking about the days and thinking about, you know, what the child's schedule actually is. And there also is there's also programs, right, that close for the summer. So you talk about the days and, you know, what's the implication for a program that's open 9 months a year versus 12 months a year. So yeah, it's not, again, it's, I guess, sort of where we started again was, right, it's not as clean as it maybe sounds, but we at some level, that is public policy for you, right?
I know. It's a tough one to identify for sure because of all those scenarios.
But hopefully there's flexibility. I mean, the key though is like there's flexibility now, and the hope is that there is that the intention is that there continues to be flexibility and it's simpler. So
yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Janet and Emily, very much. And again, if any of you have thoughts that have come about after this meeting, definitely reach out. And we welcome you both back as you get further down the road on some of this. If there's some questions you want to bring back to the group, welcome you to come back. And I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Crossman.
Hi, all. What an incredible first hour and a half of this meeting. So just wanting to say thank you to our co-chairs and all of the folks who are here sharing experience. As I transition into talking about monitoring, this is the exact type of meeting that allows us to do that really well from a qualitative lens, to understand what's happening on the ground and how to think about it, how to talk about it. And that last section also reminds us that it's complicated and messy, and it's not always going to be about just a number, right? And there's a lot of times where we can't say, here's what we know about the total number of hours of non-traditional care, right? Non-traditional hours of care and what that means for different parts of the system. So just really appreciating folks' ability to sit with some of that tension that we're doing our best to implement and to monitor. And there's a lot of things that we aren't going to know. So how do we capture and document what we can and call attention to some of those limitations for how we think about moving forward? So I think I know almost everyone on this call, but if I have not met you for whatever reason, I'm Morgan Crossman. I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. And related to Act 76, Building Bright Futures is charged with monitoring the early childhood system and supporting accountability, which in this case means supporting the state in identifying the metrics of success and looking at progress and that monitoring over time. And what I want to walk you through today is the vision that we've put together, as well as the strategy for how we're going to monitor Act 76, and then get your feedback on the document that I provided earlier this morning, which we're calling the Act 76 Dashboard Snapshot. So I want to start with saying, here are the 4 areas for how we think about the strategy for monitoring this piece of legislation. The first is around stakeholder engagement. So we have done over the last, 4 or 5 months, a series of stakeholder engagement opportunities to say, okay, what does success look like? What is most important in terms of being able to monitor this piece of legislation? So we've had a series of small group sessions with public and private partners. I won't name all of them, but there were so many different types of groups engaged, from state agencies, from the business community, from academic research partners, from early childhood educators, from families. And we've really tried to go to every level of the State Advisory Council network and say, what would success look like in each area of legislative intent? And what are the top 3 most important things to measure to know whether or not we're making a difference? We've also engaged folks through a survey. And now what we're coming to you with today is, have we hit the mark? Here is what we're putting out to the world in terms of that high-level dashboard. What you are not going to see is the hundreds of indicators that were involved in the original brainstorm that we are still working with state agencies and private partners to monitor. They just might not land in the, in the 2-pager. So that first section is stakeholder engagement. The second area is around measuring quantitative impact. The third is measuring qualitative impact. And the 4th is strengthening data systems. As we think about how we're measuring impact, we are going to do a little bit of work to think about RBA, results-based accountability. And as we're thinking about the quantitative impact, that's where we're really trying to capture the how much and how well. And then as we think about qualitative impact, it's how well and is anyone better off? From a quantitative perspective, what we did was a very robust brainstorm, or compiled a very robust brainstorm from colleagues statewide. You are seeing in the table that we sent the top, I'm not even sure how many in this moment, the top topic areas that folks said, if you were going to measure anything, these are the topics you have to hit. And these are the top 5 to 10. We tried so hard. We had so much feedback that said, just give us one number. We want one number that would tell us whether or not we've made an impact. And what we've tried to say to folks is you can't land it in one number. You actually have to look at a series of indicators across each section. And even that is not going to tell you about how it's impacting families and communities and providers and educators. So
Morgan,
yes.
Before you go further, I don't know that everyone is looking at the document. Do you want me to, I sent it an email in advance of this, but do you want me to do a screen share so folks can see?
In a couple of minutes, yes.
Okay.
Right now, I just want to give you the how it was created and where we are, and then yes, definitely screen share it. So as we moved through the development of all of the indicators, we had over 50 in every single bucket. And it was so incredible because what people said is all of the data is important. And what we said is we don't have all of that data, and let's do our best to say, here's what's most important. We do have that spreadsheet. We are working so closely with the Child Development Division, the Agency of Education, to say, okay, what of this data do we currently have? What of this data were we told is most important and we don't yet have? And how do we think about starting to develop ways to capture that data? And the other thing that we've worked closely with the Agency of Education on is specifically around pre-K data. How do we document some of the major limitations to that data and provide it to the pre-K implementation committee, who is needing to make some very significant decisions in progress to make recommendations on how to move that work forward. So we've been working on what is the most simple way to present this information, and what we've landed on is that table that was sent. I want to go through 2 more sections with you, and then we'll pull up that table. The piece that I am really passionate about with our team, in addition to that table, is how we are actually measuring qualitative impact. And there's so many different ways that we are planning on doing that over the course of each year. Some of that work happens with small groups of members from the Child Development Division, the Agency of Education, and those who are actively implementing inside of state government to understand what's working well. We are also just about to engage in a collaborative grant agreement with Child Trends, the Child Development Division, and Building Bright Futures to qualitatively examine the impact on families and providers and educators across the state. So we're going to be working on this over the next 5 years. I believe we just received a 5-year award. So that's a really exciting component of this. And our strategic plan committees, namely ELD, right? This group is the group that we are really coming to say, how is this working? What questions do we have? What do we need to be thinking about as we move into the next year, either of implementation or related to policy? Because what we've seen already this year is that there's some amazing work. There's some unintended consequences of what happened in this piece of legislation, but we're also seeing some challenges in implementation. And some of that is because of the deadlines that were set and how long it takes to actually execute components. So how do we communicate that back to the legislature as they are thinking about creating those timelines and deadlines for folks? So we, in addition to those other 3 areas where we're going to be qualitatively looking to partners, we're also going to do a biannual qualitative survey to the field that we will be looking to all of you to help disseminate alongside the work that we're doing with Child Trends and CDD to say, tell us about the impact. Are there things that we're not seeing that we need to know about that would either celebrate the success or talk about some of the challenges and things for us to think about? So some of the topics that we'll cover there are, families, and educators and providers' experiences with the different changes at different points in time. Same thing as we're working with the administration. What is this like for you? What are the lessons learned? How are we operating in continuous quality improvement so we can take next steps for the next year? And what are the unintended consequences, and how do we communicate those pieces in a really thoughtful way? The final section of how we are thinking about monitoring this piece of legislation is how we are thinking about strengthening the data systems. So we're working really closely with, again, the Child Development Division, the Agency of Education, to say, how do we think about the systems that we have in place to capture this information? How do we compile it? How do we share that data in a meaningful way? How do we publicly make that meaningful and available as soon as possible? So when I say strengthen data systems, that's the type of work that I'm talking about. There's also a lot of work that's happening at the Data and Evaluation Committee, which is another one of our strategic plan committees, where we're working on saying, here are the gaps that we know about in the data. Here's what data is available, documenting those limitations and making plans for how to capture that data. There are several ways that you should expect to see us publicly talk about what we found in monitoring. So I just want to give you a heads up of what that will look like over the course of the year. We're annually required to report to the legislature in January. Nothing else happens in January, so it's the perfect time to be writing a report to the legislature. I am very much so joking and know that all of you are in that same space where so many reports are going to the legislature, which is why we're trying to figure out what are the different ways that we communicate this in a meaningful way back to stakeholders. So we'll absolutely use strategic plan committee meetings, the state advisory council meetings. We will likely be putting together, in addition to having indicators in our data dashboard, we'll also be putting together a data brief of the indicators that you see in that dashboard snapshot once it is final, and know that that will be an ever evolving document each year to make sure that we are capturing the right thing and updating it based on what those needs are. And then we'll also be working with CDD and AOE to think about how are we publicly celebrating more of the successes that we're seeing along the way and communicating those things out. I also imagine there will be a series of testimony depending on the year to provide those updates. Any questions about just the process? And then I'll put up the screen share, or have Beth put up a screen share of the dashboard snapshot and orient you. Awesome. Okay. So Beth, are you in a place to share your screen, or would you like me to?
I can bring it up. Hang on.
Awesome. So I want to just do a quick orientation to the table. Again, without seeing it, that's okay. There's such a robust list of indicators that have been developed. And where we are right now is looking to simplify and pare that list down based on partner feedback. As you can imagine, all of our stakeholders have different things that they want to see us measure and be able to speak to and be able to talk about, right? So it is really, really hard to narrow this list down. And one of our strongest partners in the system right now in our business community has said, we just tell us one indicator. What's the one thing we need to know about the impact of this? And we want to know about child outcomes, and we want to know about access. And one of the most important roles that we can play is to say, yes, we want to provide that number. We want to provide that information. And if you want to know about access in 3 different areas of our system, here is the constellation of indicators and the things you would need to know to understand what equitable access looks like. And again, you're seeing a bulleted list of 5 in the available bucket and 3 in the unavailable. What you're not seeing is the 30 others that we also have in the dashboard that we've already worked with the Child Development Division on, and are working with the Agency of Education, the Governor's Office, Vermont After School, and so many others to say, what data do we have that tells this story? So I think that what you're seeing us try to do in this dashboard snapshot is say, we need to have a narrowed down list to make it simple and meaningful. And I think that this committee more than most of our other strategic plan committees, is so attentive to this legislation. You understand what was intended in the law. You are actively implementing different components of it. You understand the unintended impact. So what I'd like to have you do is take 2 minutes to look either at the screen share or this document in your inbox. And I want you to think about the following questions. The first is there a highly critical indicator missing from this snapshot that if we do not publish it as a part of the dashboard in the highest level, we're missing the boat? And I really appreciate Amy from AOE already, put a couple of really important notes in the chat. The second is there's a lot of data in here that folks are saying is so important for us to have to understand the impact of this law and just to understand our system in general. So how challenging is it going to be for us to think about capturing that data, especially for those of you who are educators, providers, directors, you are actively working with different programs in the field? How hard is it going to be to capture that data? And are there potential mechanisms that we can brainstorm to systematically capture this information statewide? So I'm going to pause and give you 2 minutes. Okay, because math is not my strong suit, we're going to come back now. And I'd love to hear from folks. And Beth, if you want to pull down the screen share, I'd love to hear what questions folks have about, again, is there a really critical indicator missing from that snapshot? And then I should be able to tell you if it lives in the broader dashboard, which again, will be made publicly available, but you'll also need to recognize that it's only going to be available if we have it. And if it's not available, there's going to be a section that says it's currently unavailable and here's why, and here are the limitations. And the hope is that we get to a place where we could say it's not available and we've developed a mechanism. In the next year, we'll hope to capture that data. And then, hey, this is actually on a much longer term list because we don't have the ability to capture it. But what are folks' reflections from what you're seeing? Go ahead, Amelia.
As often can be the case, hi everybody, Amelia from Northern Lights at CCV, curriculum manager. As often is the case, this is an unedited comment. It feels more like a reaction than a well thought out idea. And I wasn't able in the time you just gave us to really deeply read into this. But we know that high quality outcomes for children is related to how much a teacher knows and how much education they have. So I'm wondering if this fits into Act 76 at all, if it was a part of that, therefore, is it something to collect data on, or how are you thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the higher level dashboard, or not, sorry, in the very intricate multiple spreadsheets that we have under early childhood education workforce, there are so many other indicators around training and credential, like all of the things that you would think about related to early childhood education workforce and how folks are showing up prepared and what that means, both from a workforce standpoint and a quality standpoint. And it didn't make it into this snapshot, but I do think it's a really important discussion to have. And it is reflected, I think, somewhat in the data that we do have through partners at Northern Lights and through the Child Development Division. Some of that data also falls into we don't have it quite yet. How should we capture different components of it, depending on the sector that we're talking about?
Great, thank you.
Rose.
Hi, thank you, Morgan. I'm just wondering about the Vermont workforce piece. I see that under that it's not currently available, but I'm wondering about understanding, having more information on where this workforce is needed, either regionally, county-wise, having a better understanding of where it's needed, so maybe we can focus more some outreach or wherever to those areas. So that was just something that popped in looking at it quickly.
Yes, great feedback. It's so interesting because one of the most important things that we heard from stakeholders is across every indicator we have, we want you to be able to tell us more about it. We want it disaggregated by whether it's a child characteristic, and then you're seeing, the age of the child and all of those components around the child demographics. You're also seeing people need to understand what it means geographically and from a regional or a school district standpoint. People want way more information about the settings, the quality levels, the capacity. And I think that's absolutely where we want to head. And what this table doesn't show you is that in some of the childcare indicators around either workforce or around equitable access, we can disaggregate a little bit more. And so you can't tell that from this table. There are opportunities to do that. And as we think about the next iteration of all of our workforce reports and work, how do we think about standardizing that data collection and being able to meaningfully do that? And that's really a question, both from, the agency's standpoint in terms of how we do that well, but also for educators to say, how would we do that well? There are some areas of the state I'm thinking about, like Meg, the work that Addison does in capturing data is incredibly robust. We don't and haven't done that in a standardized way across the state. Are there opportunities to think about how to do that well? What would it mean to be able to do that well? How much time would it take on behalf of educators and providers who don't have the time to do that? So those are all of the things that we're brainstorming and talking about right now. We do have a lot of data. And there's a lot of data we need. How do we do that well without putting the full burden on our educators who are already doing this work and are experiencing survey fatigue? So that's a piece of that conversation. Other reflections? The only other thing I want to offer is this dashboard snapshot is going to be an ever evolving snapshot. So on an annual basis, we will publish the data we have. We will update some of the limitations and what's currently available. There will likely be transitions over time in when we are able to report some of that feedback, which I think is important to know. And the dashboard that we are launching at Vermont Kids Data is so much more robust and will have so many more of the indicators that folks care about that may not be in this high level snapshot. So just letting folks know, starting in January, Building Bright Futures is relaunching our data dashboard. We previously did it in the form of using the framework of our strategic plan. And what we've realized is that what folks really want to be able to do is search by topic. If you click on childcare, you want to know what access looks like, quality, workforce, right? All of those things. So we've revamped the dashboard and you will see it in that form. You can also search by strategic plan goal, and you will eventually also be able to search by Act 76 and the snapshots and the topic areas as well. So more to come in January, but really value this group's feedback and content expertise in this area. If you didn't get a chance to review this or you have feedback, we want to hear it. So please reach out to myself, Beth, or another member of our team.
Last chance for questions or feedback for Morgan. I'm like amazed at, I've seen all the spreadsheets. Robust data. I'm amazed. What is it, like 2 pages now or something? Oh, Bev.
Hi, I'm a little bit new to this conversation, filling in for Matt. And so I'm not sure if this is helpful, but I'll say it and then you can let me know. And part of it is that one of the things I was wondering is, as I was just taking a quick skim of the information or the dashboard, was not always clear to me how much of this data is point in time versus how much is like annual. So when we say capacity, if we say we have like 200 childcare slots in a region and we have 400 people in them, does that mean because there was some turnover? So just not sure how that plays into this data.
That is the right question, Bev. And it's something that that we're working with CDD on right now, not just related to childcare, but also the Agency of Education. One of the interesting things that has come up as we've been partnering with them on this data is the timing of data collection and the timing of the cleaning and then the process that it goes through to be able to make it publicly available. So what we will also be showing is that in this Act 76 dashboard snapshot, we will publish based on a moment in time, here is what we know. However, in the data dashboard, we will be updating the data that we can more regularly. The hope is on a quarterly basis, and that you will be able to see by indicator. This is a quarterly, this is an indicator that can be updated quarterly. This is a point in time indicator, and you will only see this based on October. I'm going to insert a date, 30th, every single year. But that is one of the most significant data limitations, both for the data that we already have and the data that we plan to collect. Right now, we do not have the ability to have this information on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. We are very lucky to have some of it on an annual basis based on the timing of those collections. So that is one of the major significant limitations, and we'll be clear about that as we're producing any of that data. Meg.
Yeah, I think I need some more time to fully digest all of this because it's a lot, right, to look at. So I'm sure I'll have follow-up questions. But one of the things, I attended a legislative event last night, and one of the 2 questions that I got that I couldn't answer that were data related were, what percentage of our incoming kindergartners have been enrolled in publicly funded pre-K? And off the top of my head, I can give a pretty good guess, but the AOE should be able to pull that information easily because we're assigning them a number when they enroll in publicly funded pre-K, and that number follows them. So that should be something, and I think they use it for the Ready for Kindergarten report. So we should be able to get that easily and be able to answer it for every school in the state. And I think that would be really interesting to look at. The other question that I got was around needs. And one of the things that I said, is a big need is we're seeing it increase in the acuity of mental health, early childhood mental health needs with preschoolers. And I don't quite know how to quantify that because it's not as easy as like an early childhood special ed number, but it would be great, especially as we're thinking about special accommodations grants and other kinds of support services that I know programs really need, to be able to quantify that in some way.
I love both of those questions so much, because one of the things that I would love for Vermont to be able to move forward with is being able to identify when a child enters the service system and how to track and follow them over time, to both understand what they have access to and when, and what that impact was on their outcomes over time. The closest that we are getting in that area right now is through the state longitudinal data system and the work that AOE is doing to be able to say, okay, here is a unique ID. And I'm super excited to say that as part of the preschool development grant, we are going to be reconvening that conversation to talk about how we link that pre-K, or sorry, I don't want to say pre-K ID. I know there is a UPK ID, but to link data in a more efficient and seamless way so that we could look at that trajectory and who has access to what and what that means for, for their outcomes. So I'm excited about that. And I will absolutely address that with the data team and the early team at the Agency of Education as we engage in conversations about how we're going to move this forward. But I agree. I think that would be a really, really important thing to look at. And then related to mental health, it's so interesting because what you're seeing in the high level snapshot is very much so, here's what the law prioritized, and here are the top 5-ish indicators about what we know right now. And in that broader dashboard, it is so much more comprehensive in saying, what are the needs of kids and families? What are the outcomes we are seeing? And behavioral health, mental health needs are in that. And they're also appearing in the state of Vermont's children. So we actually use the National Survey for Children's Health to look at and monitor and track over time what those needs are for children as we think about behavioral, social, emotional disorders and conditions. And we're working with the Department of Mental Health and the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program, VCHIP, on some of that work to say, okay, how do we talk about this? And who wants to know that information, right? Are the people who are wanting to hear us talk about Act 76 also needing and wanting to see that information? And we think the answer is yes. And our responsibility at BBF is to have that comprehensive picture. So I appreciate both of those points. And they're in the bigger dashboard. And thank you to Sherry and other teams of people who have had to look and really dive into the very robust dashboards and other spreadsheets where we have said, okay, here is everything. And now we've got to pare it down. And what does that mean?
Hey, Morgan, you may have said this, but I was writing notes and looking at the chat. For the unavailable data, is there a plan to try to make that available, or is it just like, this is stuff we'd want to know and we can't?
That's the question that I've already heard from legislators as well, because their question in seeing something like this is, okay, what's actionable for us, and where is it that we don't have capacity versus we don't have the data versus, what is the issue and the limitation? The way I am thinking about this with my team right now is that the currently unavailable data is our next step. Right now, we're going to compile the data that is available, and then our job, both under Act 76, but also as the Data and Evaluation Committee, is to say, now how do we create mechanisms to capture the data that is needed? Because unfortunately, so many of the pieces in this, like the disaggregation, it might be happening in specific areas of the state, especially related to pre-K data. A lot of it is captured at the local level, but there's no standardized mechanism, right, to get that information to the state. So again, there are so many different ways that we can think about capturing this data, and that's the next step for all of us is, how do we do that well without burdening the administration and the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground? What's the best, simplest way?
Thanks, Morgan. And you're right, it is happening in place. I get lots of great fun data from both Becca and Meg, who are really good at sharing really interesting and compelling data. So it does happen in certain pockets. Any other questions for Morgan? So I wanted to spend the last few minutes, and if you do have a question, you can raise your hand as I'm talking, the last few minutes thinking about what suggestions or actions as a result of today's meeting that we should consider. You can also put something in the chat. I had a couple things that I wanted to remind you of. Janet and Emily really didn't get any feedback around that question that they asked around, like, what is the number of absences that they should be looking at when we want to identify a child underutilizing CCFAP. So I encourage you to reach out to them, share your ideas, thoughts, suggestions, to help them really formulate what will work for everyone.
And the other piece I wanted to make note of is that the information shared by our ELD committee and the panel around the readiness payments was really compelling. And I want to remember all of that as we may have opportunity to reshare that or ask them to reshare that in the future. So I think that's an important perhaps action to have on our list. The other piece I wondered about and reflecting, and Amy's not here, on Amy's comments around the use of the term early childhood educator, it made me wonder if we should spend a session with Vermont AYC presenting on the process they're going through in submitting an application to the Office of Professional Recognition to recognize the profession as early childhood educators in different levels and roles. So that might be a future agenda item that we want to get feedback and from this ELD committee about and share that ongoing process. Do others have? Becca?
Can I just piggyback on that piece that you just said about VAC and professionalism? I think that if we can include the Northern Lights folks into that, because the other confusing piece, right, is AOE, VAC, credentialing, and the career ladder. And so when I talk to programs around like, wait, which hat are we wearing? That's also a confusion for people.
Thanks, Becca. Oh, we'll put that. Yes, State of Vermont's children will be released, and I believe we're planning in February to do a deeper dive in this meeting, but if you want to attend that on the 18th, Beth put the registration link there. That's another action. Any other thoughts, actions, requests from the committee? All right.
Just really appreciate
you,
people's engagement. Yeah, this was fabulous. Thanks.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in 2024, if not before. Thanks.